All right, we're going to talk about networking today. This would be when you're networking two computers back to back, maybe even more than two. You may end up with three or four computers, and depending on your wiring configuration, it can hold as many computers as you'd like to connect to the database. So we'll start off with a fairly simple network, and then we'll talk about how you can expand that into maybe three or four workstations if needed. So before we ever get into any programming thing, we'll start with kind of the supplies that you need. And you'll notice that if you go onto the tutorials and you get to the networking page, there is this tutorial on how to do it and kind of a rundown of everything you'll need for that. I'm not going to spend too much time reading it because we're going to basically go through all of these steps and successfully connect yourself to another database. To start that process, you've got to get some hardware. You obviously need a second computer, and you're going to need some wiring configuration to connect the two. Don't attempt to do it wirelessly, although you can make it work, and you can get a wireless connection to connect. It's not going to be stable enough that you'll want to do registration through the wireless connection, because if you're in a record as it's a wireless connection, it's going to corrupt itself, and it's going to break it down. The first part of networking is going to be the cable. When you get to the network switch or a crossover cable, what you want to purchase is, if you're doing two computers, the easiest way you can do that is just simply take your two computers and plug them together with one cable. It's going to be a network crossover cable. Make sure you're buying a crossover cable and not a Cat5 Ethernet cable. There is a difference, even though they look identical. So when you go to the store, make sure you're really making sure that they're buying a crossover cable. And the other configuration would be a 5-port switch. That's simply a 5-port switch that has exactly that. It's 5 Ethernet ports on the front, and you can connect Ethernet cables to those. And you don't want to connect a crossover cable. On the screen here, I've got a couple scenarios of Cat5 crossover patch cables, which is what the network crossover cable is, and that's what you want to purchase. You don't want to purchase Cat5 cables. You can tell there's quite a cost difference. If you're at the store and you're seeing a Cat5 10-foot cable, it may only be about $2. And if you notice, I jumped over to the Radio Shack website. A 10-foot crossover cable is upward of, usually this is an online price, usually it is about $17 to $20. So you'll notice a big price difference, and that's why the network crossover cable is a little more robust than what it does, and that's what you need. It will not work with just a regular Ethernet cable. If you are going to go with a 5-port switch, that is pretty typical scenario if you're going to use more than one other computer to connect to, and with that scenario you can use Ethernet cables, and you actually have to use Ethernet cables to plug in the 5-port switch. And that scenario would be the switch. If you envision the 5-port switch on the table, you'd have 2 Ethernet cables, one plugged into each port and then one going to each computer. The 5-port switches all usually take AC power, so you'll need a plug, and it'll plug in and it'll power up. But with that configuration, you could plug a 3rd, 4th, or 5th computer into that. So that's kind of the two differences in how you've got to do that. So on that side of it, you'll need to get your other computer. You'll need to get the proper wiring configuration that you want to use. And then what we'll do here today is show you how to take each computer and make sure they're connecting to each other. So if you notice on the desktop, I've got basically two desktops here. If I can find the second one, we'll go ahead and open up that second desktop. And what I've done for demonstration purposes is I'm basically going to use another server in the office that I can drill into remotely here, and we'll get those two going. And so for demonstration purposes, this is my own personal computer here, and I will open Race Manager and kind of just show you what you're used to seeing when you open your computer. You're used to seeing Race Manager open up, you get to the open screen, and a couple things I'll point out that are important in networking to always notice is down here on the bottom screen next to the database, obviously you're always on a race database, is the SQL server, and you'll see the SQL server here says local and USABMX. The SQL server that you're running on is always USABMX, but it may not necessarily be local. If you're on a secondary computer, it's going to show that name. Local means you're on the physical computer that you're sitting in front of. So in this scenario, this is my computer, this is Black Mountain's database, and this is all of their races in the database. So you can see we're on the Black Mountain database. The secondary computer, once you get it set up and you're up and running and you've got the thing working and you're all plugged in, you've got to open Race Manager, obviously, but before you really dive into any of those scenarios, there's a couple more things we got to do networking wise. But you'll also see here as I open this, it says SQL Server Local USABMX, and if you open that, you can see it's a brand new database with no events, which most likely as you set up your secondary computer, you do need to install a full version of Race Manager, and you do need to have a database in it. It can be a blank database, obviously, because you're going to probably download the master database as you do the new install, and it's not going to have any race history on it, and that's fine. For networking purposes, we kind of call one the main computer or your normal computer that has a database, and then you've got your secondary computer or your slave in some. If you know a little bit about networking, you can refer to those as the master and the slave. One is obviously the one that owns everything, and the slave just kind of works for the owner, in terms of looking at it that way. And when you get further into it, we can go deep into networking, but what we want to do is just kind of make sure that you are aware of how to get these things communicating to each other and connecting the database. So, for that purpose, we're just really thinking of your main computer, which is your full-time. You've got that laptop there every night, and that's what you've been running races on. And then you've got your secondary computers, which don't really have any information in them. They just come in and play every now and then. You plug them in for the bigger races or your state races, and that's where your secondary computers come into play. So on both computers, you'll need to jump into the networking. You can do this a couple different ways. You can right-click on the networking icon down here and choose Network and Sharing. When you get into Network and Sharing, you will see the Windows Firewall option. In the Firewall, you need to make sure, and take note that what you see on my screen is slightly different than what you'll need at home, but I'm going to point you to exactly what you need. And that's because we're in a domain-controlled environment. Bill Curtin's our administrator, and he has control of that, so I can't exactly adjust everything I need to here, but I'll show you exactly what you need to do. So there's a button here that says Turn Windows Firewall On or Off. When you get there, you need to make sure all of these are set to off. So this would need to check off, this needs to be off, and this one needs to be off. Obviously on mine you see an on here, but you don't want to have that. We've got some, as you can see it says right here, some settings are managed by your system administrator. I'm on a company computer and we've got admin stuff going on here. So there's a lot of rules that have been set for firewalls, and obviously Race Manager is one of the rules that's been allowed through the firewalls, so we can communicate here in the office with our software. And if you're very familiar with firewalls and sharing permissions on computers, feel free to set some permissions and make it right. But again, the default to getting this working is turn your Windows firewall off, turn your home network firewall off and the public, turn them all to off, and then your other step is going to be advanced sharing. So again, we're back to that same screen where we right click down here and chose Network and Sharing Center, and then you want the advanced sharing settings. In the advanced sharing, you need to make sure network discovery is turned on, Again, you're seeing different variables here because I'm on the shared network here in the office, but you want everything turned on. File and share and printing, you want the network discovery, and you want to do that on the public and the home. So again, turn network on, turn firewall on, turn your file and printer sharing on, and obviously anyone can have read-write access. So make sure everything is turned on through the advanced sharing. Make sure your firewall is off. And then again, you'll need to repeat those steps on your other computer. And on this computer, I'll show you a little bit different way to find those. Obviously, again, you can right-click, go to Network and Sharing Center. You can also go to the control panel, and you will see Network and Internet. And then you can go into the Network and Sharing Center from there. Advanced sharing settings. Again, you need to turn all of those on. And on my computer, you can see I've got a little bit different scenario where these are on network discovery. And that in turn is because this is now you're working on a different computer. Again, that other one I was just on a minute ago is the server on the company directory here in the office, and then now I'm on my personal laptop with the network discovery, and you can see I've got the options to turn everything on. And then you would also need to get to the firewall, and I'll show you a third way to do that, and that is simply just to type the word firewall in there, and you'll be able to get into the Windows firewall. And again, you need to go on or off, and you need to make sure everything is turned to off. All the firewalls turned off. Ignore the fact that this is on. Again, this is a network security permission here that we have control of in the office, but you'll want to make sure all these are turned off. And then again, you've got your sharing permissions back on the Network and Sharing Center. You need to make sure all those are on. So you want to turn on the discovery and sharing, and you want to turn off the firewalls. Once you've done that, you've got Race Manager already open on the normal computer or the master computer, the computer you use all the time. It has the database, and you know that it does because you're looking at all the races in there, and it says local down here. So the next step is to go to that secondary computer that you're bringing in for the bigger races, or the secondary one that you now want to link. And when you get in there on there, you're going to see that also says local, but you're going to notice again that there's no race history. So all of your Race Manager networking stuff needs to happen on the new computer or the secondary computer that you're bringing in for networking. And what you'll do is go to File, you'll go to Preferences, and then in Preferences, obviously this database is brand new and fresh, never been set up, so you'll see there's no preferences anywhere. But if you go to Other Options, and then Database Server, you want to change this because you don't want to be local. You don't want to have the database that is on this local computer that you're sitting in front of. You want it to be that other database that's on your main computer. So to do that, you'll hit that change button, and then before you use the drop down, you need to click refresh. And what that does is kind of search your shared networks and go through the firewall and search for all of the computers that may be connected. And then be careful that if you've got multiple computers, more than just the other one, and you're using 3 or 4 computers, that you're connecting to the main database, the one that has your race history. So you've got to know computer names. In that scenario, we'll go back to the main computer, and we'll kind of take a look at what the computer name is here. And to do that, you can just go to the C drive, and then you can click System Properties, and you'll see that my computer name is C Wilson Win 7. Now, when I'm back over on the secondary computer looking for a database, I've hit the refresh button, and that obviously searches the network for everything that may be connected. And then in the drop down, you'll see list of computers. Obviously, if you're using a crossover cable and you're just plugged into one computer, you're going to see one other name there. You're going to see local, which is the computer you're sitting on, and you're going to see another computer name of the computer that you want to connect to, which has the database. So in this case, I am connected here in the office, and we've got multiple workstations in membership and virtual machines that are kind of sitting on the server that all run Race Manager. So you can see that there's a lot of different variations. Obviously, Jen Morris, our national scorekeeper, her computer's in this office. We've got a lot of different servers, and right here you can see the C. Wilson Win 7, which is the name of that other computer that we're trying to connect to, is also in that list. So that's the one I want to connect to. I want to choose that connection, and then you'll see database server must be tested before saving once you choose that. So then you need to test the connection. And at that point, you're going to either get database server connection is good or database server connection is bad. If you're getting a bad, it could be because the program version on each computer is not matching. If you notice here on this computer, we got 10.18, and over on this computer, we've also got 10.18. But if you had a scenario where you're trying to connect a newer version of Race Manager to an older version of a database, they're not going to be able to communicate. Everything needs to be at the same level. So if you haven't upgraded your regular computer and you're now downloading the software for a new networking scenario, you may need to make sure your other computer's up to date too. So get everything in a matching version, and then from there, when you see test connection, it should say good. If you're getting bad, it won't let you save it, so you'll have to go back and track down what it is that's missing in the setup. And then from there, once you've tested the connection, it allows you to save it. And when you save it, and then you choose to save it in the server configuration, you'll notice something happened. Down here on the SQL server, you now see the C. Wilson Win 7, which tells you you're not using the database that's on this computer anymore. It's connected to the database that is on that other computer. And if you'll notice also when we do that, and you go to open, you now see all those events from that other database, the Black Mountain database. So you can open an event over here, and now that event is open. And now back on the main computer, you can see I haven't even opened the event yet over here, and they're independent of each other even though they're using the same database. So again, as you jump in there, you'll see the database matches. Now, the scenario you could do, now that you know you are connected, we will show you a little bit different scenario, which, once you're done with racing, you don't really need to disconnect them, but just for demonstration purposes to kind of get you an idea of how the connections work, we'll go back to the other options and we'll go to the database server. And you'll notice something here. Before the bike numbers, and I'll show you this again after we connect back to local, had the default assigned numbers of kind of most of the alphabet, where the Black Mountain database that they like to use, they only use letters B, C, and D. So a lot of the preferences and things came over from the other database. Now you look at track setup, remember before it was defaulted to Chandler BMX and the default that everybody gets. It also has, their range of membership numbers. Everything as far as their setup is now connected over here. So that's the beauty of networking too. You really don't need to do anything to the main machine. You just need to go into the secondary computer and connect it. And at that point, you're ready to do registration on two different computers. We'll go back to the local and we'll test that connection. And obviously that connection will be good because that's the local machine here. And you'll notice it goes back to local. The database is still race, but you'll go in there and now there's no events again because obviously this was the blank database. So that's kind of a little bit of overview on how to do networking. It was probably fairly fast, but if you're going through that scenario, just pause and slowly go through each step until you get yourself set up. And again, all of your setup is going to be in the Windows firewall in your configurations, and then at that point, you should be able to go in here, change your database server, hit the refresh button, and see a list of the other computers to connect to. And then at that point, you just need to connect to it. And find that computer, test the connection, save, and you'll be back up and running and connected to the other computer. The last thing to talk about is really kind of where you're going to print or how the printers are shared, and they're not shared through Race Manager. The printers are known through the computer that you're working on. So if you only have one printer, you would need to spend some time on your main computer by going into devices and printers and finding a computer that is the normal computer for you that you use all the time, and go into the properties. I'm sorry, not the properties. You want to go into the preferences, the printer properties, I should say, and you'll see a sharing tab. One way to do that is obviously share the printer through the network that you've created, give it a name, and apply that share. And then on your other computer, you would need to go in and install that shared printer. And to do that, all of that is really Windows based, and you've got to kind of learn how to share printers. But you would add a printer, and then you would say it was a network printer, and it would kind of search the network. And since you are plugged in and do have a network configuration and that printer is shared, you should see that shared printer. As you can see, these are our copiers that are here in the office, and those are shared. And you can see that those are physically on a machine, but they're being shared. So, I in turn really could install this printer that's shared on the network, and that's what you would want to do to get a printer working. And then, of course, you need to go into the preferences on that computer and then choose that printer. But your printers will share, and then they will print. Secondary thought, some tracks, they don't even worry about the second and third computers doing printing unless they've got receipt printers, and again, those are usually hooked up directly to each computer. But the thought on sharing these databases is so you can have additional windows, and maybe you keep your membership window to the one that's actually connected to the printer, and then again, you could also print motos from just that one computer that prints from that computer. You don't actually have to get into sharing all the printers unless you want each workstation to be, kind of a high performance deal and be able to do memberships and print motos and do all of that. And then the only other thing to think about as you're doing network configuration is when you're in an event and you start to write motos and you start to do other things, you kind of want to make sure that you really need to make sure that none of the other computers are using the moto board. You pretty much want to do all of your scoring and all of your printing and all of your writing of motos on one computer. Doesn't really matter which one you choose. Most tracks you're obviously going to choose the one that's the master database and not one of the slave computers. You're going to choose the main computer that you always use and write motos and print motos from there. But you could do it from any one of them. You just need to make sure you're not accessing the moto board tab from any of the other computers at any time. If whichever you choose to be the moto board computer and the scoring computer, that's the computer you should probably stick with for the moto board. Other than that, these things can all do everything. The only thing they won't be able to do is obviously create backups or do writer updates. You need to do those from the master computer too. But once you're up and running, that should be kind of the scenario to get everything going. And then from there, you can just play with all of your settings, your sharing settings, your file settings, your print settings, and you can do a lot. But that's the basics of how to get 2 computers or more. If you're going to do more, it's just repeat the same process on every computer that you're looking to connect. Again, you don't need to do anything to your main computer that is the one that is your local SQL server. That one pretty much is ready to go all the time, and you already know that because you use it. It's all the other computers you need to go in and make all your changes to the database server in Race Manager. And then, of course, every computer you need to go in and do your firewall and sharing permissions. So hopefully by now you've got yourself networked and you're ready to do motos on each computer. So That's it for networking.